storylines, who watched films obsessively, who felt more real inhabiting a fictional character than he did being himself. There was something about transformation that called to him. The son of exiles, the boy who had grown up between worlds, never fully belonging anywhere, on stage, in front of a camera, he could belong completely. He enrolled at New York University's Tisch School of the Arts. He studied, he trained, he dreamed. And then the rejection started. Year after year after year, audition after audition. He was too foreign-looking for some roles, not foreign-looking enough for others. He was Chilean in a Hollywood that didn't know what to do with that. He was too handsome to play the villain convincingly, not handsome enough in the conventional leading man mold. He was, by almost every metric that Hollywood used at the time, the wrong person in the wrong place. He took any work he could find, a Law & Order episode here, a Graceland appearance there. Small roles. Blink and you miss it moments. He was in his 30s. His peers from drama school were either succeeding or giving up. Pedro Pascal kept going. He moved back to Los Angeles. He waited tables. He coached acting students. He had a core group of friends who believed in him, most notably a woman named Sarah Paulson, who would become one of the most important people in his life, and whose friendship with Pascal would later become bizarrely weaponized against him. But we'll get to that. For now, understand this. Pedro Pascal spent more than a decade in a city that didn't want him, doing work that barely kept him alive, refusing to quit. The refugee mentality doesn't leave you. When you've watched your parents lose everything and survive, the idea of losing a career doesn't break you the same way. You've seen real loss, you know how to endure. But endurance only takes you so far. At some point you need a door to open. His opened in 2014, and it changed everything. Game of Thrones was, by 2014, the most watched television show on Earth. It was a cultural phenomenon of unprecedented scale. And when the production came looking for someone to play Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper, a Dornish prince who arrives in King's Landing seeking revenge for the murder of his sister, they found, through a chain of auditions and callbacks and unlikely circumstances, a 40-year-old Chilean-American actor who had been waiting a decade for exactly this moment. Oberyn Martell was only in one season, 8 episodes, but Pedro Pascal's performance was so electric, so magnetic, so devastatingly human, that audiences didn't just like the character, they fell in love with him. Oberyn was funny and sensual and fierce and heartbroken. He was a man driven by grief and love in equal measure. He was, on a show full of extraordinary performances, somehow exceptional. And then the show killed him, in one of the most viscerally shocking death scenes in television history. And the internet mourned as though they had lost a real person. Pedro Pascal hadn't been around long enough for people to take him for granted. He arrived, blazed, and was taken away, which, in the cruel mathematics of fame, is sometimes the best possible thing that can happen to a rising star. He became someone people wanted to see more of, someone they would look for in everything that came next. And what came next was, at first, more of the same, supporting roles, guest appearances, another year or two of proving himself. The door had opened, but it hadn't opened all the way yet. That changed in November 2019. The Mandalorian premiered on Disney Plus on November 12, 2019. And within a week, the world had a new obsession. Not just with the show, not just with Baby Yoda, but with the man behind the helmet. The conceit of Pedro Pascal's role as Din Djarin the Mandalorian is strange and almost paradoxical. For most of the show's first season, you never see his face. He wears a helmet, always, and yet his physical presence, the way he holds his body, the subtlety of his movement, the warmth he conveys without a single visible expression. Audiences felt everything. They felt the character's loneliness and his tenderness and his ferocity. It was a masterclass in physical performance. And it established something that would define Pedro Pascal's entire subsequent career: the ability to make audiences feel deeply connected to him even when he's holding something back. Because here's the thing about Pedro Pascal that most people don't fully appreciate. He is, by nature, a private man. In interviews, he is warm and charming and disarmingly funny. He will talk about almost anything. But there are rooms inside him where the doors stay shut. About his romantic life, he says almost nothing. About certain parts of his past, he deflects with humor. He gives you the feeling of openness while carefully controlling exactly what he reveals. The Mandalorian made him famous, but it was The Last of Us that made him a phenomenon. When HBO's adaptation of the video game The Last of Us premiered in January 2023, critics were cautiously optimistic. Video game adaptations had a terrible track record, and the game, while beloved, was about a gruff, middle-aged man escorting a teenage girl through a zombie-ravaged America. Hardly the premise for prestige television. What happened was extraordinary. The show became one of the most critically acclaimed television series in years, and at the center of it was Pedro Pascal as Joel Miller, a man broken by grief, hardened by survival, slowly and painfully learning to feel again. Pascal's performance in the third episode alone, which focused on a devastating love story between two supporting characters and required him to do almost nothing but react, that performance generated more awards conversation than most full seasons of television. He was nominated for an Emmy, he won the Screen Actors Guild Award. He became, simultaneously, the darling of prestige television critics and the obsessive focal point of millions of fans who had never watched serious drama before in their lives. The internet coined a term for it, Internet Daddy. It was half ironic, half genuinely affectionate, a recognition of the strange alchemy of Pedro Pascal's appeal. He was 50 years old. He had a face that looked lived in the best possible way. So many times, by so many accounts, that the algorithm mistook it for truth. This is the modern machinery of a smear campaign. You don't need evidence. You need repetition. You need enough voices saying the same false thing that the platforms themselves begin to treat it as fact. Who was behind it? The investigation that followed pointed to an organized effort with roots in several directions simultaneously. There were accounts linked to supporters of J.K. Rowling, who had targeted Pascal after he publicly called her a heinous loser for her anti-transgender advocacy. There were misogynistic content farms that had found a profitable formula in manufacturing celebrity scandal. And there were, it emerged, deeper connections to a network of bad faith online actors who had built careers on viral controversy. One of the primary spreaders of the content, an online personality known by the handle LowLoverruled, was himself exposed during this period as the subject of multiple credible allegations of real misconduct. The man who had positioned himself as a defender of women against Pedro Pascal's alleged predation was, according to accounts from multiple women who came forward, someone with genuine predatory behavior in his own history. His former podcast co-hosts issued a statement. Women began telling their stories. The person who had tried to make the world afraid of Pedro Pascal was revealed to be what he'd accused Pascal of being. But by the time that revelation came, the damage to Pascal's reputation had already spread across millions of screens. The correction never travels as fast as the lie. Here is the moment where everything shifts. This is what you don't know about Pedro Pascal. The thing that, once you understand it, recontextualizes every single thing about who he is. His sister's name is Lux Pascal. She is a transgender woman. She is an actress. She is brilliant and beautiful and fierce. And she came out publicly in 2021 in an interview with the Mexican edition of Glamour magazine, where she spoke about her identity with extraordinary courage. Pedro Pascal has never once wavered in his support of her, not privately, not publicly. He wore a Protect the Dolls t-shirt to a Marvel premiere, a shirt that originated in trans-supportive internet culture. He called J.K. Rowling a heinous loser, not as a casual celebrity take, but as a man whose sister's safety and dignity are directly implicated by Rowling's advocacy. He has stood in the breach again and again with his full public profile for a community that desperately needs allies with platforms. Now consider what it means that the people who targeted him, who organized a campaign to portray him as a predator, to destroy his reputation, to flood his comments with suspicion and hate, had, as one of their primary motivations, revenge for his defense of transgender people. They weren't really angry about handholding. They were angry that he refused to be complicit, that he used his fame to protect vulnerable people, rather than protect himself from controversy, that he was, in the language they despise, an ally, and they tried to destroy him for it. Think about the man's history for a moment. Born in exile, raised between worlds, spent 30 years being told he didn't belong, finally achieved everything he'd worked for, and then, at the peak of his career, was targeted by a coordinated online campaign because he loved his sister. Pedro Pascal's response to all of this was so perfectly, disarmingly, characteristically him that it became its own story. He went to his Instagram. He found the hate comments, the Dexter gifs, the "I'm watching you" posts, the accusations and insinuations. And he replied to them with kindness, with emojis, with hugs. When someone sent him a piece of fan art in the midst of a hate comment flood, he complimented it. When someone told him they were unfollowing him for supporting trans rights, he replied simply, no. He didn't explain himself, he didn't issue a statement, he didn't have his publicist draft a carefully worded denial. He met malice with warmth. He met a campaign designed to make him afraid, with the gentle, unshakable security of a man who has survived real things and knows the difference between danger and noise. It was, and there's really no other word for it, magnificent. But there's one more layer to this story, one more room that hasn't been opened yet. Even as he became the most beloved actor on the planet, even as millions of people projected their deepest feelings of warmth and safety onto him, Pedro Pascal remained, in the most essential way, a mystery. His romantic life is almost completely unknown. He has never confirmed a relationship. He has never been definitively photographed with a partner in a context that establishes anything with certainty. He speaks warmly about past relationships, but never specifically. He deflects, charms, and changes the subject with extraordinary skill. In early 2025, he told an interviewer that one of his earliest crushes was on Harrison Ford. The internet, which had already spent considerable energy speculating about his sexuality, erupted. He didn't clarify. He smiled and moved on. In February 2026, paparazzi photos surfaced of Pascal in New York City with Argentine creative director Rafael Olara. They were walking together, having dinner together. Fans declared, without evidence, that this confirmed everything they'd already decided. The hashtags trended globally. Google searches for his sexuality spiked 450%. Pascal said nothing. He has said nothing for 50 years about this particular subject, which is, depending on how you look at it, either a man's right to privacy or the most carefully maintained secret in Hollywood. His fans celebrate him as a queer icon and as a straight ally with equal fervor, and he has never disabused anyone of either reading. He exists in a space that the internet desperately wants to categorize and that he refuses, with elegant consistency, to define. Here is what we know. He has loved deeply. He has grieved deeply. He has, in his own words, spent years learning to sit with himself, to be present in his own life, to find peace in his own company. He goes to therapy. He has talked about the loneliness that comes with this kind of fame, the way the volume of love directed at you from strangers can paradoxically deepen your sense of isolation. He is a man who survived exile as an infant, who survived 30 years of rejection, who survived a coordinated campaign to destroy his reputation, who survived becoming famous enough that millions of people feel they own a piece of him. And he remains, through all of it, fundamentally himself, warm, private, funny, tender, complicated in ways he doesn't perform for the camera. There is a Pedro Pascal the internet has built, the internet daddy, the gentle giant, the progressive icon, the man whose hugs feel like safety. And there is a Pedro Pascal who exists behind that construction, who has spent his entire life learning to endure, who carries within him the quiet knowledge that everything can be taken away very quickly, and you still have to keep going. Those two versions of him are not as different as you might think, but they are not identical. And the gap between them, the space between the man as he is seen and the man as he is where the most interesting truth lives. He wrapped Fantastic Four: First Steps, he continued work on The Last of Us, he filmed Sandmama, he kept moving, because that is what he has always done. The smear campaign faded, as smear campaigns do when they run out of oxygen. The fake videos were flagged and removed. The narrative collapsed under the weight of its own dishonesty. Vanessa Kirby gave an interview and said with crisp finality that she had never been uncomfortable, that the handholding was her idea as much as his, that she was deeply fond of him, that the whole thing was, in her words, an example of how quickly the internet can distort a reality that the people actually living it know to be entirely different. The man they tried to destroy was still standing. More than standing, he was thriving, because that is, perhaps, the only thing you need to understand about Pedro Pascal. He was built for survival. His whole life has been training for the moments when everything tries to fall apart. A refugee child, an actor who spent a decade being invisible, a man who refused to apologize for loving his sister. He knows something that his enemies don't. It's Pedro Pascal, the actual man. The man who cried on camera without shame and held his co-star's hand because he was nervous and wore a t-shirt for his sister and replied to hate with emojis and kept going through everything. Who holds that man? He hasn't said, he may never say. And somehow, that silence feels like the most human thing about him. If this story shocked you, check the video on your screen now. I believe it was made for you.